Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindsay Wong, and I'm an author and associate professor of creative writing in the English department at the University of Winnipeg. I'm a Chinese woman with blonde hair, and there is a painting of maple leaves behind me. I want to welcome you to our very last event for a publishing speaker series of 2024. And today we are very, very lucky to feature a reading and Q&A with award-winning author Zalika Reid-Benta, who is such an amazing talent, who effortlessly moves us from contemporary realism to fantasy. Our class read Pighead last week, and we really had a terrific discussion on characterization and storytelling. Today's event will be recorded, so if you do not want to be on camera, please keep your video off. We also ask that you keep your mics muted. We have a lot of questions submitted already, so we will only turn to the chat if there is time. Thank you so much to the English department and the research office at the University of Winnipeg for your support of this event. Today, we acknowledge that we live and work in the territories of the Shinnebaug, Cree, Dakota, Dene, Métis, and Oji-Cree nations. The University of Winnipeg sits in Treaty 1 territory, ancestral and traditional homeland of Anishinaabe peoples. As a settler of color writer, I'm not only committed to honoring and following the lead of the land, water, and cultural protectors of this space, but I also am a constant and forever student of the remarkable stories and their tellings by Indigenous peoples here and around the world. So thank you so much for this space, and I'm very grateful for everyone for joining us today. And if you feel moved to, please share where you're coming from in the chat on Zoom. So today, I would like to welcome Zalika Reid-Benta, who is an award-winning author. Her debut novel, River Mama, was shortlisted for the 2024 Trillion Book Award and has received star reviews from publications such as Publishers Weekly and Booklist magazine. River Mama is an Amazon Books editor's pick for Best Science Fiction and Fantasy and was October 2023 pick for the City Line Book Club. Reid-Benta's debut short story collection, Frying Plantain, won the Danuta Gleed Literary Award and the Rakuten Kobo Emerging Writer Prize for Literary Fiction in 2020. Frying Plantain was shortlisted for numerous awards, including the Toronto Book Award, the Trillion Book Award, the White Pine Award, and the Evergreen Award. Her picture book, The 12 Days of Jamaican Christmas, will be published in 2025. So let's welcome Zalika. Oh, I think you're muted.
That is so weird. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. That's my cat. I'm on his chair. He's very upset. So if you just see one cat or two cats around, it's because I've made the grave error of sitting on the armchair that I paid for.
I see a shadow of a cat. It's like a ghost cat.
It,
It's
it
perfect
works
for
out.
Halloween.
Exactly. Yeah, so I'm supposed to read,
Yeah,
right?
would you like to
Sure. It's gonna be
give
super
us a short
short.
reading?
Yeah, I'll give a short reading. It's I've been thinking of what I was going to read, and I think because I, generally speaking, when I'm talking at like a university sort of talk, I end up just reading some of the passages that take place at the University of Toronto in this case. Um, I had it marked. Here we go. Okay. So at this part, Alicia has contracted Duppy sickness, and she's at the University of Toronto, and she's sort of seeing a ghost story take place because there's a legend of two builders, Reznikov and Diablos, who built part of the University of Toronto, and the legend has that one murdered the other, and she's and then the person, and then Reznikov, I believe, yeah, he haunts U of T. So she's having a conversation with Resnikov. One swing nearly struck home. The fear lit in Diablos's eyes. His frantic search for the dagger concealed in his boot fueled Resnikov's lust for his blood. He charged, and Diablos sought to hide in the colonnade outside of Croft House. But Resnikov followed, backing him against the door to the tower. Triumphant, he stepped back to deliver the fatal strike, but Diablos's swing But Diablo swung the door outward, and the axe connected with the wood instead as the two of them fell to the ground, wrestling and choking and striking each other. Diablos broke free from Reznikov's hold and ran into the building, quick and light on his feet. Reznikov's pursuit was a lumbering shuffle through the unfinished quarter up the stone steps. Diablos pounced from a flight above, dagger in hand, the blade piercing Reznikov's chest. He spluttered and
I think we lost you for a minute and you disappeared and came back, and now I think you're muted.
this is so strange.
Yeah, no worries. It's Halloween, so
It
it's
is Halloween. Technical
we're
difficulties.
cursed today.
I'm just going to continue to read. I have been here ever since. Alicia touched the spot on her chest where Reznikov had been stabbed on his, trying to overcome the sensation of death. You are not Susie, the ghost said finally. Alicia nodded, grateful for the realization. Exactly, but you must stay here with me. The ghost moved a teleportation. Alicia jumped. You came to me. No one comes to me. I feel it, your pain. You are adrift. If you stay here with me, you will be fixed to the spot. You will have a single purpose. The response was unexpected in its appeal to Alicia's sensibilities. She was wrong-footed and speechless, and a part of her was acquiescing to the offer. Would it really be that bad? In that moment, it kind of felt right, poetic even, to spend an eternity haunting an institution that had been haunting her since she left it. No other thoughts, no other pressures, no other expectations. Just her and another ghost rooted to one spot for eternity. A moment was all that was needed. Resnikov's ghost seized Alicia's consideration and disappeared into her body, smothering her with its presence. She clawed at her throat until she was too tired to lift her hands. Resnikov made her even weaker than before, blanketing her with fatigue. The ghost was like a parasite, siphoning her energy, emptying her. The more it drained her, the more her vision blurred into whiteness, smearing out parts of her surroundings like finger smudges on a screen. Resnikov encountered me and you together forever, forever, me and you together. Heaven running toward a building entrance was the last thing Alicia saw before the white overtook her vision. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love that scene. I also love that novel. I just think it's just so chilling to just go back to your university and be haunted by a ghost. And as I've told you, River Mama was one of my favorite books of 2023. Just such a terrific and exciting read. The way you're just able to combine so many elements of, fantasy and horror, a little bit of horror and mythology and realism. So I'm so
What?
excited that you're here.
Me too.
Is it okay if I jump into a Q&A?
Absolutely. I love just going right into the questions. So I'm game.
Great, thank you. So you are an acclaimed award-winning fiction writer who is so respected in Canlit and the writing community. Can you talk about your trajectory to becoming a successful published author? Um, a lot of our students, want to be writers, right? But they don't know how, right? They don't know what to do after university. So I think it'd be great to hear about your path.
Yeah, definitely. It was not super straightforward. So I did my MFA at Columbia. And right when I finished, I decided to start submitting at the time it was my short story collection, which is Frying Plantain, which was also my thesis. So I basically decided to just send my thesis everywhere. And because I was in New York, um, New York is like considered the grand place to publish. So I was only submitting to agents in New York, and the response was not good. The response was basically like, "This is too niche. This is too Canadian. We can't really like. I don't think our readers will really connect with the story." So then, at this point, I had moved to the UK for a bit. So I tried to submit to UK agents. And there was some interest, but they wanted me to take out all of the Jamaican aspects of it. And then I was like, that's literally the book. Like I can't, like I'm not gonna redo this. And then I moved to Canada and I realized that I didn't really know anything about, or moved back to Canada, anything about Canadian publishing. And I submitted to a few agents here, and then they were like, but it's a short story collection and nobody reads short story collections. So it didn't feel like there was any place for what I had written. And so I got pretty discouraged and I just stopped submitting things and I started should work on a fantasy novel because I was like, nobody wants anything Jamaican, nobody wants anything that's a short story, nobody wants anything Canadian. I'm going to try to write something else. And as I was writing something else, I realized that I missed the sort of I don't, okay, I'm not going to say I missed workshop, but I realized that I was so used to, for 2 years, being with other people and having them read my work. And so I didn't really know.
Oh, we lost you again. Oh, you're muted.
It just goes out. I'm not even sure. Like, I don't touch anything. It just like disappears. It's so weird. Okay, I didn't know anybody. And so I actually wrote to my old instructor at the School of Continuing Studies because when I was doing my undergrad at U of T, I was also doing a creative writing certificate at the same time. And so one of the instructors there, I sent her like my YA fantasy that I was working on, and she just asked me like what's happening with Frying Plantain, like what's happening with that book. Because she really, really liked it. She was one of the first people who saw it in its first iterations. And I said, I don't know, nobody really felt like reading it. So I kind of moved on. And all she said to me was, I want to see it in a bookstore one day. And so then I kind of, I don't know, I was like, okay, so I went back to it and I didn't realize that you could submit your stuff to smaller publishers. So I did. I submitted it to smaller publishers. I submitted it to Banff. Then I forgot about it because it takes like 7 months to hear back from any of these places. And then I heard back from Banff and I got accepted. And when I was at Banff, I was also accepted. A few very small publishers had accepted my submission, and I was very lucky because I was at Banff at the time, and therefore I could talk to like established authors about what to do. And they were like, "You need an agent, and just tell them that you have offers on the table." And so then I did, and then right when I got back from Banff to Toronto, I got my agent, and then the rest sort of like happened from there. But another big thing was because it was my thesis and because I was done writing, Frying Plantain at the time was only 90 pages. And I was like, yeah, that's it. That's enough. Like, that's all I need to do. And then my agent was like, you absolutely need to add more. Like, you cannot just submit 90 pages. It's too short. So when I was at Banff, I actually ended up writing like the other half of the collection. And then it was still very short for people. I didn't realize how much word count like mattered. They wanted about, I think, 60,000 words, and I gave them 50. I was just like, this is the most that I can do. And so yeah, it took a few years, but that's basically how I got published and then from there it's it's what it is now.
Mhm. It's an amazing story, and I think that it's important, especially for like BIPOC writers, right? When we're writing, not I guess for the mainstream, right? Sometimes the route isn't straight all the time, right? Even though we have mentors and we have people who say like we love diverse lit, right? It's really twisty, and I had a very similar experience with you, like just like you after Columbia, right? Too niche, like not mainstream enough. This is not funny. Why would you do this, right? It's
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's so frustrating.
It really
Is it?
is.
Yeah. I was gonna ask. It's frying plantain or plantain.
It depends on who you speak to. If you
Okay.
speak to like people from like continental Africa, they'll say plantain. If you speak to people from the Caribbean, we will say plantain. It's such a long argument between us. But I say plantain.
Okay. I will say plantain then. So you and I, we met in person last year at a literary festival in Waterloo. And we were talking about like what's it like to graduate from Columbia. And just like Elisa in River Mama, right? After you graduate, sometimes it's easy to feel lost. So what advice would you give to writers struggling to get their first book published? Because I think they always say, the first book is the hardest, and in some ways it's true, but also at the same time, every book kind of feels like, a new venture, right? It's like they can say no anytime.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. When I wrote my second book, I realized how hard second books were as well. But I mean, in terms of it sounds so unhelpful to say that people have different timelines, but it's true. Just because, like, especially BIPOC, especially because it's, you can hear that it's going to be like, yeah, we really want diverse lit. And then when you submit something, they're like, this isn't really what we want. And so it can take a longer time, but that has absolutely nothing to do with your talent. It doesn't have anything to do with you. It has to do with just finding the right fit. And so perseverance is really all I can say. Like it was just sometimes you might need to take a break. Like I took probably what a 2, 3 year break between going to Banff and like submitting my stuff to the UK and to certain agents in Toronto and then in New York. And I think for me, taking that break helped my book in the sense that when I wrote the basically second half of Fry and Plantain, because I had grown as a person and grown as a writer, and it wasn't just like straight from grad school. I think that shows in terms of like my character's development. So that worked for me. So sometimes you need to take some time off. But I always just say like, don't give up. It's very, very easy to just because it's a lot of rejection. But yeah, just basically like sticking to it and trying different things. Like you can try to go for an agent, but you can also submit to smaller publishers yourself. Maybe it's not necessarily the publisher that you thought you would be going to, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the wrong publisher. Just trying to find the right fit. Yeah. That's,
Yeah, and
that's
that's good advice. It's like pivoting, right?
yeah, exactly.
Sometimes we don't always get into the school we want, right? And there's a backup school, and eventually you will still get where you want to go, just a
Exactly.
different route. Mhm.
Yes. So there's no one way, I guess.
Yes, yes, I guess it's true. So and you and we had talked a bit about working in publishing, I think last year. And I was wondering, oh, are you back? Yay. Okay, you're back. So we talked a little bit about publishing last year, and I was wondering like what your experience was working in publishing and how did it shape your work?
So like I didn't okay, so like what do you mean by like working in publishing? Because
I think
like
you had mentioned you'd worked in it like internships.
okay, for sure. Yeah. So I
Mhm.
did an internship at a literary agency and honestly for that it kind of just because my job was to read from the slush pile and after a couple of like so I would read from the slush pile and then I would say yes or no and then I would speak to like the agents about why I said yes or no and after a couple of times doing that they got used to they were like okay no like you're competent so we don't need to have this meeting every time just say yes or no and so for me, and this was in New York, so it might be different in like Canada, but for me, I think that just showed um wow, like you have interns looking at the slush pile. It wasn't necessarily a great sort of like feeling for me because I would also see like people like my classmates would submit to this agency and I would read their stuff and I'd be like, I go to school with them. I don't know if I should be the one who reads this. Maybe someone else should do that. And so I think for me, it was just kind of like, okay, not necessarily saying that like, interns are incompetent because I definitely wasn't, but knowing that it wasn't going straight to the agents was definitely eye-opening for me. And so that also made me realize that sometimes it's a numbers game just because you need to get to like the right person. I think that also made me realize it really is about taste. It really is about whether or not the person reading it just gels with your stuff. And so part of that was kind of comforting, but part of that was just like, okay, well, I really need to like try to find like really research the different agencies, the different publishers that I'm going to submit my own stuff to. But also, it just helped me as a writer in the sense that I feel like reading work, whether it's from the slush pile, whether it's published, whether it's like, your workshop, helps you become a better writer just because with workshop, if something doesn't work for you and if something does work for you, you have to back up why. You have to explain why. And I think that definitely helped with how I want to present my own ideas, my own themes, my own characters, because you have to defend what happens in your book. And so I think just being in that capacity helped me with how I wrote for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, I had a similar experience. I don't know. Did they bring out the garbage can and make you sit beside the garbage can? I had to sit beside one and throw out the slush.
I actually did not have to do that.
Eh,
So yeah, that's intense. Luckily, I did not have to sit next to the garbage can.
this is Random House, so
Oh,
we're
okay.
getting so many submissions. And so I remember
Right.
the publisher just like went out and she bought this huge garbage can, put it beside my cubicle, and she said, just throw it away.
Wow.
So
Yeah, it
yeah,
was like a boutique lit agency. So yeah, it wasn't quite that intense, but it was definitely just like yeah, there was definitely like a stack. And it was a little bit interesting because I ended up doing my work in reverse. So as long as like the work was done, then nobody really cared about what happened. But I can get writer's block like super easily. And it's only when I'm like thinking about it at the back of my mind, but not really focusing on it, at least for Frying Plantain, that I could write. So when I was actually in my like agency space and at my desk, I was writing my short stories. I wasn't actually reading the slush pile, but when I went home, I was reading the slush pile. And then I would come back and just be like, okay. So like I did. And they were like, yeah, do whatever. Just, don't lose it and make sure that by this time. And so that was also something I guess that I inadvertently learned, at least for that book, because I think writing books, at least for me, the process is always different. And that process was I can't overly think about what I'm writing. So when I'm working, I write. And when I'm supposed to be writing, I work.
so funny. Yeah, and it's such a interesting process, right? To see how books get made, right? There's so many levels, right?
Yes.
And then it can be disheartening, I think, sometimes, but at the same time, it's kind of good to know it's about
Yeah,
being realistic, right? About
yeah,
what
definitely.
happens when you submit your book to an agency or a publisher.
For sure.
Mhm. So many of our students at UW, they have to work practical jobs or take care of their families. A lot of them come from immigrant backgrounds or working class backgrounds. What advice do you have for aspiring writers who want to write but don't necessarily have, I guess, the right sort of background or connections? I know, like, when I was at Columbia, most of my classmates had trust funds, and a lot of them were royalty, and I was like, so you're like cousins of so and so whose throne is, I don't know. It was really funny. But I don't know if that was your experience. But what advice do you have
Yeah,
for
my
these
experience
writers?
was like they were, I guess, considered like literary royalty. So they were like friends or cousins or nephews or nieces of like big authors or journalists. And
You're back again.
I'm back again. When I was in the MFA program, girls was like a really big, like girls had just started by
Mhm.
Dunham. And I just remember distinctly that there were two girls who were very upset that Lena Dunham got the opportunities that they didn't get because they had the same connections. So they're like, why her and not me? And I was like, I have nothing to offer to this conversation because I don't even have those connections. But in terms of like advice, I think, I think I don't know any writer who is just a writer right now. Like in terms of like for me, I have a nonprofit job. For other people, I know that they're doing other things. And so I guess it's just um write when you can. And I say that in the sense that like again, I think that sometimes we think that there's a certain timeline that we need to reach or we need to reach certain things by a certain time. And I think that once you realize that that's really not the case, it opens you up and frees you up to do what you need to do and write at the same time. Like I don't think there's a huge rush when it comes to that. So like for instance, for me, when I was at Columbia, one of my instructors who I really admired, I was really furious with her actually because someone's parent had come like during graduation and they were just like, can you like recommend our daughter, because she listens to you, other avenues of like what to do? And she said no. And then I was just kind of like, okay, but when you were starting out and you were writing, you could do sort of like you could sort of just like not work and write at the same time. That's not necessarily the case for us now. And so I don't really, I guess just because there's so many different avenues in terms of like I know people who became lawyers, who became journalists, who became like teachers, and then they've just decided to work when they can, or they've like or and they've done that in the sense of like joining or I wouldn't say joining, basically having organizations like Diaspora Dialogues, which is the organization that I work for, where we have mentorships that can be 1 month, that can be 6 months, and they're free. Or even trying to do something like BIPOC Connect, which is also, I believe, free. And then like submitting things to grants because you can get time off to work. You get paid a couple $1,000 and then maybe you can take a couple of weeks off work and write. So basically for me, it's just like writing when you can, how much you can, and then not worrying about the timeline so much. Sorry, I was like all over the place with that, but it's like such a like big question.
Yeah, I know it is. And it's good to be realistic, right? Because not
Yeah.
all of us have the means or the funds just to, you know, to just stay home and write. I don't know
Yeah.
anyone who's really a full-time writer these
Yeah,
days.
exactly. So that's why I think I'm always focused just on time because I know when I graduated, my whole thing was like I needed my book published like right away, like right
Mhm.
now. It has to be right now. And I just don't think that's the case. I think like in hindsight, taking your time, doing what you need to do in order to protect your time to write is perfectly acceptable. So if you need to get another job or do another job, then go for it and carve out that time. And if you happen to have the freedom or the ability to try and go for residencies and try to go for fellowships, then absolutely do that as well.
Yeah, it's good to take whatever opportunity, right? Because
Yeah.
the world's not designed to let us
Yeah,
write. We just have to grab it and write. But
exactly.
also, were you so I was also at Columbia when girls came out too, so maybe we were there at the same time, but we didn't know each other
It's very possible.
because I was in the nonfiction cohort.
It's very possible because
Yeah.
fiction and fiction, we would call the fiction group like basically the frats. They were very fiction, the at least my cohort didn't really mingle with other people and were kind of obnoxious. So it's very, very possible for that.
That'd be so funny. I was there when Casey Platt was also there.
See, I don't think I ran into Casey, so no, I don't know. Maybe like a year or so, like
Maybe we missed by a
yeah,
year or
like just miss
something.
each other. Yeah.
Okay, that's funny. I want to just, I guess, talk about craft. As I mentioned, Rubber Mama is just so brilliantly crafted and it's so propulsive. Um, and when I say it, it's like one of my favorite books of 2023. I'm not just saying it to be nice. I'm not a very nice person, as most writers are. Um, and can I ask you about the process of crafting that novel and how it arrived in that current form?
Yeah. So I mentioned before that when I was taking time off of Frying Plantain, I was writing fantasy. And so I was writing a high fantasy novel that I wanted to have Jamaican folklore inspired. Um, and I'd been working on that, I guess, for like 3 or 4 years, but I also didn't know how to write a novel because I was so focused on writing short stories. So this high fantasy novel was like 300 pages and halfway done. The chapters were like 20 to 40 pages. It was just a mess. And I was also writing it differently than I wrote Frying Plantain in the sense that Frying Plantain, if I didn't like a sentence, then I wasn't going to continue. And it was very laborious and very torturous. And so I was like, I'm going to do the complete opposite of that with this fantasy novel and just write and word vomit and edit later. And so I was doing that. And then one day I stopped like on page 355 and just started writing River Mama. And my agent was just like, yeah, I think you were teaching yourself how to write a novel with the fantasy. And then once you got the hang of it, River Mama kind of just came out. So it kind of came out in that sense. But I think the reason why it came out was because so many things were happening that I was thinking about for years. So various things were happening in Toronto specifically. One was that there was this article in the Globe and Mail, and I also want to say Vice, I'm not sure, but they attributed Toronto slang to celebrities instead of Jamaicans and East Africans. And social media went obviously like was very, very upset. And then there were like response to articles being like, no, it's not new. No, it's not made up by celebrities. This is actually Jamaican. And I remember I was also having this like argument with a friend of mine who is from London in the UK and has sort of similar slang because of the Jamaican influence there. And he was saying that Patois wasn't a language, it was slang. And I said, no, we use it as slang, but it's a language. And this was like a 3 month fight. And so that was in my mind. Then there was also a lot of appropriation of Caribbean, specifically Jamaican cuisine. And there was a particular restaurant that said, she wanted to elevate Jamaican cuisine, and I really hated that because I was like, how come it's elevation when it's other cultures? Nobody says that. Like, what is elevating? And I was also just thinking about how I felt after graduating. And all of those things I think were just in my head. And also this a desire to write about Jamaican folklore and Jamaican mythology. And it came together in River Mama and also writing like the high fantasy. I think that's where the fantasy element came in. And then, wanting the contemporary millennial sort of, dejection just came from thinking about my life when all of these conversations were happening. And I was working at the Gap and was living at home with my mom, and I didn't think I was ever going to get a book published. And I think I wanted to write about that because there was also a lot of articles at the time about what it meant to be a millennial. And there were hardly any articles written by BIPOC and written by people who didn't have trust funds. And so I was like, I really want to write a different sort of experience to that. And so that all came together and how I wanted to incorporate Jamaican folklore with a contemporary, setting and put it in Toronto. And I'm also very cinematic with how I write. I like to make my work feel like they're movies. So I was watching a lot of TV shows and watching a lot of movies for that propulsive sort of, energy. So it might not necessarily have anything to do with what I was writing, but like I watched Superbad 6 times because it takes place in one night and it has that sort of energy. I was also watching like season 6 Buffy because that's when she's also going through her sort of, life sucks, what am I going to do sort of phase. And I wasn't really thinking about genre. I wasn't really thinking about anything. I just wanted to get all of the different things down on the page. And then when it got to the publishers, I was like, well, then we can talk about what genre it is and how they're going to market it. But it definitely wasn't something that I was thinking about at the time. Otherwise, I would probably get writer's block. And it was also during lockdown. So it was keeping me from feeling this sort of tension and sort of loneliness of being in lockdown at the time. So all of those things is kind of what happened with River Mama.
Mhm. It's like your COVID novel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I think I'm also doing that now, the idea of like, what do you do as a millennial, right? After everything is just over.
Yeah,
But it's such good advice though, just to think about just the writing itself and not worry about genre and audience. I think we get really caught up with that, right? When we're writing and then people just never finish their books, right? Especially for
yeah,
newer writers.
yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And like to be fair, excuse me, the reception to it has been mixed in the sense that some people like it's not this and it's not that and it's not that and it's not this, and some people don't really get it. Some people want it to be more this thing, then that thing. So that might be something that you would have to deal with once it gets, out into the world. But I also just realized that this was exactly the book that I wanted to write. And I think as a writer, that's really what you need to focus on. Like if you're happy with what you wrote, if you wouldn't change a single thing about what you wrote, then you've won.
Mhm. And your book will find its right audience,
Exactly.
right? You're not writing for everyone. That's
Yeah.
impossible, right? It's going to find your readers. So having written this internet interconnected short story collection that's rooted in realism, and then you wrote a fantasy novel. So how would you characterize your metamorphosis as a writer? I always tell people like we're one person at the start of the book, and then we're someone else by the end, and we just keep growing, hopefully, or evolving. And sometimes I don't know. For me, I think sometimes I feel it's like very circular. I don't know. I don't know if I'm getting better.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just I get more ambitious with each novel. I want to try new things with each novel, so or with each book, because one's interconnected short story collection, one is a novel. This will be a novel. I also wrote a picture book. I think for me, it's just trying to keep things fun, and seeing what I can do and seeing what I can pull off. And so I think it's just me continuously growing and seeing what sort of pockets of genre that I can do is what I was going to say. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, so I think that's what it is in terms of like my metamorphosis as a writer, just trying to challenge myself and seeing. And it's also really funny just because I thought that River Mama was a complete like a very traditional novel. I was just like, I mean, I don't really play with time that much or structure that much. Like I think it's very straightforward. People would be like, this is a really weird book. And I'd be like, that's great because I've always wanted to be a weird writer. Like I've always wanted to write a weird book. So I'm really, really happy that I did that. Thank you. And yeah, so I think that's definitely what it is. Like now I'm trying to do dual perspectives. I've never done that before. So it's just finding new things. And there's so much that you can do with writing. I don't think it's hard to try to find new things and challenge yourself. I just never want to be the person who I can go back to the same sort of themes, definitely, but I don't want to feel like I'm trying to repeat the same thing over and over again.
Mhm. Yeah. Because and then the craft becomes sort of boring in that
Yeah.
sense, right? Like you want to push the conventions of craft.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
I don't think it's weird at all, but I don't know what it says about me. I'm just like,
Well,
yes,
yeah,
I want
I
to
was
live in
just
this world.
it's just like this seems perfectly, yeah, straightforward to me. I don't know. I've seen that a lot and I'm like, cool. I'm glad. I'm glad you thought that it was weird.
And but I mean, I love the duppy. They breathe fire. Like I want to live in a world where there's like fire breathing duppy. So students were wondering, does writing get easier in some ways or not?
Not
And
for
they were
me.
wondering, does it get less frightening for you?
Um, I don't think writing gets easier. I think there are days when writing can be super easy. Those are really fun days. I love those days. And I think that there are days where it can be super hard. Um, in terms of it becoming less daunting, I think what I've realized for me, it kind of goes back to not thinking about the reader. I really can't think about the reader while I'm writing, or otherwise I'm going to lock up. So I just think about my characters and doing what's right for my characters. My characters, that world is my world right now. The reader doesn't exist. When it comes to editing, then I can think about the reader. I can think about the reader with my publisher, with my editor, with my agent. And I think for me, that's how it becomes less daunting because in the middle of creation, I can't think about anything else. Otherwise, I won't do it. So yeah, basically just burying myself in the world of my books is how writing becomes less daunting to me. And I learned that with River Mama because with Frying Plantain, I was definitely thinking about the reader a lot as I was writing. And it was also because I was in school and it was also because I was hearing feedback at the same time. Like River Mama was very different in the sense because it's my COVID book, nobody read it until my editor. So like that was daunting when I finished it. And then then the arcs went out and I realized, oh my goodness, nobody had read this before. But at that point, it's too late. The book is done. So I'd prefer it getting that daunted sense of that, like, yeah, when the book is actually done, not when I'm creating it. Otherwise, I would never create it.
No, it's interesting because I'm always emphasizing workshop in on my writing courses. So I'm always like, think about your audience, think about your audience. And I think to a degree, thinking about your peers can be helpful, thinking about
Yeah.
like the craft, like how do I communicate this message? But also maybe thinking about like the wider readership. That's not helpful. That's
Yeah, if I
so
think in that
frightening.
sense, for sure, because I would
Yeah.
read other books for sure. So I'd read like Nella Hopkinson, I'd read Octavia Butler. I would see how they communicated certain things because writing is a communicative form. So you have to be able to communicate with the people that you're reading your book. And so in that sense, I think I was in conversation with other books, and just thinking of myself as a reader and what gets to me. And I did have like one or two friends where I'd be like, does this make sense to you? But in terms of like, yeah, wider readership, that's not helpful for me personally.
Mhm. Yeah, same. Are you just thinking about all the critics and thinking about like all those like people who are gonna read it and then immediately write a Goodreads review?
Yeah.
That's always fun, right? And students were also wondering if you might have some advice on editing your own work. They have an assignment coming up on setting. A character they have to write about how a character feels uncomfortable in a particular setting. So
So edit,
how do you edit your own work?
how do I edit? So even though it's not quite the same as when I first started writing, and if I didn't like a sentence, then I wouldn't continue. I do definitely like reread my paragraphs a lot before moving on. I print my stuff out. There's something different about reading something physically than on the computer. I read my stuff out loud. And that's also something that, yeah, that definitely helps. And I guess when I read other work, it helps me edit in the sense that I don't know if you've done this in your workshop, but when I was in workshop, particularly for short stories, what they would have, what one instructor had us do was physically write out a short story that we really liked. He had us physically write it out because then we could actually feel the points where they reach certain things. And so I don't necessarily write out an entire book anymore or write out an entire short story. But for me, especially because starting is really difficult, I will write out a paragraph of a chapter or a novel or a short story that I really admire just to see like where people reach certain things. I guess structure is really big for me. So that's kind of also how I edit. And when if it's something like, being in an uncomfortable setting, sometimes if I definitely try to put myself in the character's shoes, like that's basically what you do when you write. Depending on how far I want to go with it, I might put myself in an uncomfortable setting just to see how I feel. Um, yeah, those are the kind of things that I do to edit and to write.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's so hard sometimes to see your own work. And that's why I think, workshop can be so invaluable,
Oh, for sure.
right? It comes less, I think it becomes less daunting to self-edit once you get used to it.
Yeah.
But in the beginning stages of sometimes when you're working on something, it's like a bit too fresh, I think.
Yeah, right.
At least
For
for
sure.
me. Yeah. So we read Pighead last week, and I was wondering if you might speak about how you shape a story and how you might experiment with structure in short fiction. I know you mentioned like writing things out. What else do you do?
It's like it's always super difficult for me to talk about this just because I don't necessarily like to think about my process.
Mhm.
I think it's one of those things again where it's like thinking about the reader, thinking about my process gets me into my head. So I'm like, I don't know, I kind of just write. And I think that's also a big part of it because I do think that I think about things in my head, but I also think that you can do that forever. So sometimes you just have to start to write.
Mhm.
And that initial just writing something down is very difficult for me. But once I do it, then I kind of don't think about it. And so for Pighead, Pighead was a little bit different because the book is fiction. The book itself is fiction and the story is fiction. But when on my first visit to Jamaica, I did see a pighead. And I always knew, like even from then, I knew one day I was going to write about it. And so I think that was just like locked in the back of my head for a while. And then I was just kind of like, I got to write about this. But something I'm dialogue is like my favorite thing to write, and dialogue is how I get to know my characters. So usually what happens is there's a dialogue scene that's in my head, and I write out the dialogue scene and then build my story towards that. And so for Pighead, the dialogue scene that came to me first was Kara telling the kids about killing the pig. So I wrote that first. And then I kind of just worked my way backwards of like what this was going to be about and how we were going to do it. So that's in terms of my structure. I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's
No,
all
that's
I,
that's really good advice, right? Just to think about like working backwards, right? If they're stuck, right? Start with a conversation between the few characters and then build up to it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. That's generally how most of my stories started with Ryan Planton.
it's great. In terms of voice, can I ask that do you come up with the character's voice first, or do you come up with the narrative voice, or is it kind of a simultaneous exploration for you?
I think well, because I start with dialogue, I guess I start with character voice, but it
Mhm.
almost feels like narrative voice at first because it's kind of like generic dialogue. And then as I continue to write, then I'll figure out their voice. But figuring out their voice also means like body language, because I also like to pair body language with my dialogue. And so then, okay, like, so if we're talking about River Mama, um, and like Alicia and Mars are having a conversation, then I would have like, yeah, okay, we talk about, oh, I know who Mars is now. Mars is also the kind of guy who's going to be like slumped over. He's going to be like this while he's talking. Alicia is going to be like having barely contained rage. Heaven is just kind of going to be like, trying to keep it together, but also kind of being a know-it-all. And that all happens through dialogue. That's basically where I find everything. So yeah, character first and then narrative.
Mhm. Great. And then I'll ask you one more question before we jump into our lightning round, if that's okay.
Sure.
So we were talking about using personal experience in fiction, and students were wondering when to draw on real life and how much to embellish it, because brilliantly incorporate Jamaican mythology in your fiction. And I was wondering how you might discuss the interplay of these conventions in your work.
Um, So I think for me is that even though my work is fiction, a lot of emotional truth is me. So it started with me for River Mama in the sense that I was Alicia when I graduated from grad school. I had to start with how I felt. I even went back to like angsty Facebook posts that I did at the time and like emails with friends just to get back into that mindset. Alicia wasn't me, but I'm writing about this emotional experience that I had. And so I think that's where it starts. And then in terms of like the folklore and the mythology, that was a little bit different because I do think that there is pressure put specifically on BIPOC of getting things right, of not being able to embellish certain things because you have to be authentic. And then how I got over that, because I'm writing fiction, is I put my insecurities into the novel. It's in dialogue. Alicia, there's a lot of talk about Greek mythology in my book because I grew up reading a lot of books that dealt and embellished and reinterpreted Greek mythology and being like, and constantly telling myself, if they can do that, why can't I do that with Jamaican mythology? And so putting that into um, the narrative really helped me be able to embellish. And so that's what I did. Sometimes you just have to put your fears in your work.
Yeah. I love that idea. Like fiction is emotional truth, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like writing a memoir, except that you can like lie, in fiction, right? You're allowed to kind of make up things.
For sure.
Great. So should we do lightning round?
Sure.
Okay. Being an author is like fill in the blank.
being an author is like being, sorry, I'm so lame. I'm just like being a storyteller.
That is true. It is a storytelling.
Like I don't have the imagination for lightning round. Sorry. Go on.
It's okay. One thing you wish you had known before becoming a creative writer.
That people are going to interpret your book the way that they interpret their book. I mean, I know that sounds like super obvious, but it's something that I had to learn a lot.
Yeah, same. I think like I thought about the process of getting published. Oh, I'm gonna have a nice book on my shelf. But I never thought like of people reading it. You
Yeah,
know what I
that's what it
mean?
like.
Like,
I just that part never got to me. So then I was like, oh no, like especially if there's something that I think is very, very clear, other people are going to have other interpretations of that. And that's like really that was kind of difficult for me to learn when I had my first book.
mhm, mhm. And you can't just tell people what you think, right?
Exactly. That you have to just let it rock. And
Yeah.
that can be very difficult.
Yes, exactly. What is your writerly superpower?
Dialogue.
That it's true. I think, well, you think you're good at everything, but I'm new
Aw.
of dialogue. What are some books that you wish you had written or something that you admire or envy in other writers' styles or writing habits?
I told this to Cherie multiple times. I really wish that I've written like Empire of Wild. Obviously, for various reasons, I can't, but I
Such an
love
amazing book.
it's an amazing book. And I remember when I first read it, I was just like, like I'm so envious of Cherie's talent. I love her so much. And basically anything by Toni Morrison. She's my literary hero. So a lot of the conversations that I have with book are her books. They have nothing to do with each other in terms of like necessarily themes or even my writing style. But I do remember like the first time reading a Toni Morrison book and having that emotional response to it and being like, if I could just evoke that in one reader somewhere, then I'm good.
Yeah. I mean, you do, right? I would say you're very successful at it.
Thank you.
Pet peeve and can lit.
Limitations. I find that can lit can be kind of limited in what they consider to be literary fiction, and that really bothers me.
Yeah, and I think the reception, especially to speculative fiction by BIPOC authors sometimes, right? If it doesn't fit a certain mold or convention, or if it's funny and it's not about trauma, they're kind of
Exactly.
like, this is commercial. This is not literary fiction.
100%. Like I remember having a conversation with someone about River Mom specifically, and they were like, I mean, it's just too contemporary for Ken Lit. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Like that shouldn't really be a criticism or something that holds you back in like the industry in the country that you live. So yeah, that's definitely something that I've been working or grappling with uh
Mhm.
as my career progresses.
Yeah, yeah. Because like some books are speculative, but they're marketed as literary. But
Yeah.
wonder if it's just like white writers, right? And then other books are marketed as fantasy or horror, right?
Yeah.
It's like, is it not literary enough? Like, what is literature?
Exactly. Like what is exactly what do you consider to be if I find like yeah, if it's not like a quiet book, then it's not considered literary fiction, at least in my experience in Canlit and that's been a pet peeve.
Interesting. Yeah, I've noticed it too because I'm moving towards the horror genre as well. Right? Makes sense to go from memoir to horror. So how would you commit the perfect murder and get away with it? I'm asking because I think, short story writers and novelists are really good at planning a murder. And also I like to compare other people's answers so I know like what's coming.
This one I actually don't think I have an answer to. All I can think about as I remember at Columbia, me and two other friends were talking about how to plan like what like a murder would be. And so one of them said that they would get a car and like put someone in it and then like try to push it off the cliff and then basically like and then like set fire to it and then there would be no evidence. And I just remember being like, I think there's so many holes in that plan. So I don't think I'm the type of person who would like plan a murder. I feel like if you planned a murder and then like you came to me and be like, Zalika, like, how am I going to get away with it? And you would tell me your plan. I could like tell you the holes in your plan and be like, okay, we gotta workshop this. And then I'll tell you where there are holes. And then we can like figure something out.
Okay, that's great. You're like good for workshopping murder, and like you'd help. Would you help me carry the body?
I guess, I mean, we're close. We're close. So then like, yeah, like we can do
Okay.
that. But if you were like, yeah, not somebody that I know, be like, good luck with that. But I will not be actually like handling the remains.
It's so funny. Jenny told me she would murder someone with poison,
Okay.
right? And then she would just hire someone to help me bury the body. Kevin said he would go to a writing group and
Okay.
then ask the writing group to switch, right? And then
Hmm.
everyone would murder like each other's. And I guess that could be a plot of a commercial novel.
I guess so. But then,
Yes.
see, the thing with me is that then you would have to trust someone else to do it. And I just don't think you can trust someone else. Like, even if you hire someone else to do it, what about like the trail and how you can't say that there wouldn't be any type of trail? But then, yeah, like I just don't feel like I could trust someone else to do my own murder. So many things could go wrong.
That is true, right? Even
Yeah,
coming to
I
you to
know.
workshop murder, you just like blackmail me or something. And three dead writers that you would take with you on a 6 month residency on a tropical island and why? Assuming that they're either like zombies or ghosts. I'm assuming that ghosts would be cleaner than zombies in a hot
Yes,
place.
I think there would definitely be ghosts, and it would be Toni Morrison, Octavia Butler, and Audre Lorde. I think that would be like a really great. Yeah, I just feel like I would learn so much from their ghosts on a deserted island.
You should write that story. I would like
Yeah,
that'd be such a great story to
I
read,
think
right?
so for sure.
And your most embarrassing moment at a literary event. You can skip this one, but I do want to find out later.
Uh, yeah, I don't think I have one at a literary event, but I do have one that I'm only tell a very few people. So sorry, everyone, but Lindsay will be the only one who will hear this story.
Yeah, literary events are funny. Things happen.
Things do happen at literary events, it's true. Like there have definitely been awkward moments. It wasn't embarrassing for me, but I remember the second literary event I ever did. It was at a library and I was speaking like how I'm speaking now. And I sometimes go, yeah, you know, and I kept saying, you know, and then this woman said, don't say you know, you're an author. And then it got like really, really quiet. And then I asked her to repeat herself, and then she repeated herself. And then I said, you can't censor how I speak. And then basically everybody in the audience like shamed her out of the room. It was a really intense experience for like my second literary event ever. So yeah, that wasn't embarrassing for me, but it was definitely like intense and awkward.
That sounds awful. And so this is just a person in the audience.
Yeah, it was just a person in the audience. Yeah.
And it's like it's so racialized to say that to a woman of color.
100%. Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
yeah,
Definitely. And then I
I,
was
I
also
believe
with
it.
like Olive Senior was the one who was interviewing. I'm like, you're not in front of Olive Senior. Like it was definitely a lot.
Yeah, it's horrible how sometimes the audience members, when they just they behave so poorly to writers of color,
Yeah,
it's like something to think about or something to learn from, I think.
definitely.
Yeah, not for us, but for other
For them.
people in the
Yeah,
audience. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Felica, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're so busy, you're moving, and you have like a million books due.
I
Really
do,
appreciate.
but this was like super fun and any like yeah, like I was really really pleased that I was asked to do this and these were great questions. I had a lot of fun. So of course, I'd be happy to speak with you here.
Thank you so much for your time. And you're on Instagram. People can find you online.
Yes.
Yes.
Instagram, it's just Zalika Arby, and I'm not really on Twitter or anything. So basically, if you do want to like keep up with me or talk to me, then Instagram is really the best way to do it. So Zalika Arby.
Great. Thank you so much. I
No
hope you have a
problem.
good Halloween. Hopefully something fun, something
Same and
spooky. Right? You do have a ghost maybe with the internet.
maybe. Yes, very possibly.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye and bye
Bye.
everyone.